Hey everyone, and welcome to the next episode in the interview series. And today I have with us Chris Guillebeau, who is an author of several books. He's a blogger and a speaker. So, your next book is coming out on September 19th, and it's called Side Hustle From Idea to Income in 27 Days. Now, that's your fifth book. So, how did you get started as a author?
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me, Ryan. I appreciate it. It's a big honor. I got started as an author maybe 8 years ago. Books were always kind of special to me, so I guess I got started as a reader first. Like when I was a kid, I loved reading books and could think about a number of books that changed my life. And so when I grew up, I was like, I want at some point in my life to write a book, but I went and did a bunch of other stuff first. I was in West Africa for 4 years as an aid worker. Then I came back to the U.S. I did some small business projects, and then I started a blog, The Art of Non-Conformity, and that's kind of what led to my first book. And I mean, I didn't know anybody, like I didn't have a name. Like if you searched for my name, you wouldn't find anything. So I just had to kind of pester a bunch of people, and eventually, like most people didn't write me back, like most agents or editors didn't write me back. But eventually I found somebody, and then I kind of worked that angle for another one, and so on. That was kind of how I first got into it. And then, of course, it's a whole other story about how I built it. But that was the entry point.
Wow, that's amazing. And how was your time in West Africa or Africa?
Oh,
Yeah,
oh,
you said.
yeah, yeah. It was. I mean, it was. It's almost like what's the adjective to use? I mean, it was also like life changing and transformative, and really kind of gave me like a worldview and a perspective, a grounding that I kind of took with me later to when I started the blog and then started writing the book. So I'm very grateful for that time.
Yeah, what made you want to go there?
I was depressed.
Oh,
That's the short version. I was kind of like, it was post 9/11 experience. I might be a little bit older than you. I don't know, but I forget how old I was, like late teenager, early 20s when that happened, and just kind of wanted to contribute in some way. I just wanted to do something, to make the world a better place, I guess. And I read about a hospital ship that was deployed in Sierra Leone, which was the poorest country in the world at the time. They had just finished like a 10-year civil war, and they needed volunteers. And they needed people who were, both skilled and unskilled, people who'd be willing to do like whatever. And I was like, great, sign me up. Like I'll move boxes, I'll wash dishes, like whatever. But like I said, it was fantastic. Like I made a 2-year commitment, but then extended for a third year and extended for a fourth year. And like I said, changed everything for later.
yeah. Wow, that's an amazing story. So I guess throughout your life, have you ever had any mentors or influential people who've gotten you to become a writer or who have guided you in becoming an
Mm.
author?
Yeah, that's great. I don't know if I've had like a formal mentor. Like a lot of what I write about is independent thinking and like making decisions for yourself and choosing your own path. But there's certainly a lot of people who have influenced me. And I guess I would first think about like all the authors that I read as a kid, like all the novelists that I read. Or then when I started thinking about writing prescriptive nonfiction, Barbara Sher was an influence on me. She wrote a book called Wishcraft and another one called Refuse to Choose. And then when I got started actually like in the publishing world, a good friend, Gretchen Rubin, was an influence on me. Jonathan Fields, who's now another good friend. It's interesting because a lot of people that I looked up to when I was like moving into that space, they're now personal friends. And that's like, for me, one of the greatest things about it because I didn't expect that either.
Yeah, no, that's developing those relationships must have been very key to your success.
Yeah, of
So
course. And then also just like people, like my readers helped a lot too. I want to like my blog readers. Like I put the word out to them. I was like, hey, I want to write a book. How does that work? Does anybody know anybody? And that kind of led me to connect with my literary agent, whom I'm still working with 8 years later. And then for the first book, I went to all 50 states and every province in Canada on like an unconventional book tour to meet readers. So they helped like so much along the way. Like they informed the process for the second book, and then a lot of things that came later as well.
wow, that's amazing. So you've written five books. The fifth one will be released soon. But of the books that you've written, which one did you enjoy writing the most and why?
Okay. Yeah, that's great. I will say I kind of enjoyed each one in different ways, and also was frustrated by each one in different ways in the writing process. I will say that this new book coming outside is certainly the easiest book that I've ever written. I don't want to say it's easy to write a book, but it felt much easier than the past couple of books have felt. I think it's because I knew what I wanted to say. And the previous two books, it was like, I have this big message. How do I say it? There was so much involved in that. Whereas this one, I'm like, I know exactly how to teach people, the subtitle of the book that you mentioned, From Idea to Income in 27 Days. It's just a question of actually like writing it all out. So that was refreshing.
Well, do you think it's also because of your experience from your past books that have led to the, I guess, the fact that it became easier for you?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, sure. Yeah, I definitely think so. But I wish, I wish like the fourth book was easier or the third book was easier. So something kicked in at a certain point. I don't know what it was, but I think honestly being intentional about like what I'm clearly trying to write about and not like adding a bunch of other stuff to it. Just like this is the message, this is what you get from this book. I think that's helped a lot.
Yeah, so I noticed on your website that you say you write 1,000 words a day. Do you just the 1,000 words? Is it just whatever that comes to your mind? Is it just what you're thinking at that moment, or is it more intentional?
Yeah, I should probably update that because that is my habit. And I did it pretty consistently for about 5 or 6 years, but I don't think I'm doing it as consistently now because now I'm hosting a daily podcast. So that kind of takes a lot of that focus. And so I write a script for the podcast, I host it. But it wasn't like free writing or journal writing. My goal was like 1,000 words that I could possibly use for something. And I might not use all of it, but the point is I'm making progress toward a manuscript or, a blog post or an essay or a guide that I might sell or something. So it was 1,000 words that were intended to be shared at some point.
Okay. And so for myself personally, I really enjoyed your book, The $100 Startup. Now, where'd you get the idea for that book?
Yeah, great. Well, thank you. I'm glad you liked it. It came from that first book tour, actually. It came from going to 63 cities in North America and kept meeting these people that I described as accidental entrepreneurs because they didn't necessarily have this intent, like I'm going to start a business or I'm going to get an MBA or whatever. And around that time, there was a lot of books and a lot of focus on traditional startups, like the Silicon Valley model. And all these people like had nothing to do with that. Like they were in their own little space. And also a lot of the advice that applied to traditional startups didn't really apply to them. And so I felt like nobody was telling that story. Nobody was telling the story of like ordinary people who, found a way to like make a good living, quit their jobs, perhaps by doing something that they loved and using the skills they already had. And so for me, I kind of wanted to chronicle that and not just chronicle it, but also kind of show people like, okay, here's how you can do it.
Yeah. So of the stories that you learned about, do you have any favorites?
Yeah. Well, now I'm doing with the new daily podcast. Every single day I'm telling a story. So every day I'm telling a story of someone who starts a side hustle without quitting their jobs. This is more focused on people who have jobs but want to create an additional source of income. I don't think everyone should go out and quit their job tomorrow, but I do think everyone should have more than one source of income. That's what the whole project is about. So let's see. There's a story. I don't have just one favorite, but quickly, story of a guy who goes on a cruise and he comes back and he actually had a good time, but he was thinking it would be boring. Before he went, he had all these questions about like what it would be like on a cruise and like can I watch Netflix on a cruise and all this kind of stuff. And he couldn't find those answers. So when he came back, he started chronicling the answers, like writing down the answers and other questions. He started a blog, just a free, simple WordPress blog. And within a few months, he was making about $3,000 a month from that blog. So he would have people come to the blog and then they would click on AdSense links and he would get paid for that. And so that's a good example of the kind of projects that I write about in the book, because it's not just about having a part-time job. It's not just like, oh, I have my full-time job and I go and work 30 hours for somebody else. It really is about creating an asset. So in that case, like that's an asset, for him because it's going to continue bringing money in month after month. And there's a lot of stories like that.
Wow, that's amazing! Within a few months, just started making $3,000. That's nice.
We had the right topic. He had the right topic, and like it was the right topic because not a lot of other people were writing about it, but a lot of people were interested in it. So that's the key, is kind of finding something like that.
Yeah. So how about yourself? Have you ever intentionally set up a business with less than $100?
Pretty much all my stuff has been very, very low cost. I mean, when I first got my start doing entrepreneurial projects, I was, I don't know, 18 or 19, and I purchased coffee from one place and then resold it in another, and that cost less than $100. And I mean, I don't know, since then, like everything I've done has been kind of on the cheap. Like it may have cost more than $100 for certain things, but I've always been very frugal, and I think that's wise.
Yeah, no, that's quite interesting. And would you say that most of your businesses or the things that you do that make you some sort of income, are you actively involved in them, or are they more somewhat passive?
Great question. Probably some of both. It just depends. Like probably maybe half is kind of passive in the sense that, like I've written a $100 startup 5 years ago, and that book is still selling, so that's
Mm,
great. But I also, I also am working actively every day.
yeah.
The podcast I'm producing every day. I'm going out on a 100 city book tour, and I don't actually get paid to do the book tour. I'm just kind of building like, foundation for the future. So there's a lot of active work, but there's also some assets as well.
Yeah, so you don't really think that passive income really works. You always have to do some sort of work on, I guess, on a daily basis.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it certainly does work in some cases. Like the guy with the blog, like he could stop writing tomorrow and he'd probably still be making money for a while, not forever, but for a while. So that's good. That's passive. But I think these kinds of projects usually tend to work best when, you can create the project and then you're not spending a ton of time on it, but you're still kind of keeping it fresh. So I still think passive income is a real thing.
Okay. All right. And so I know you're a world traveler. And which countries, what are your top three countries that you've been to?
Top three countries. Okay, I believe you're in South Korea right now, right?
That is correct.
Very connected country.
Yeah.
Very good internet there, which is important. I really like Australia. I also like Hong Kong. I really liked Cambodia. I like South Africa. I like some lesser known countries in Eastern Europe. And then also, like last but not least, I just like the process of traveling. So I like going from place to place. Like I really enjoy that. Some people think it's all about like the destination, but for me, I kind of like the actual transit.
Okay. Well, you definitely gave more than three, but
Yeah, sorry about that. I should have cut them down.
yeah, it's all right. So, assuming that you had to pick your top three countries,
Mm.
what would
Oh
they
yeah.
be, and
All
I
right.
guess why?
Okay, great. We'll narrow them down. Australia was just very special to me. Like the first time I went to it, I felt like right at home, and I've gone back several times and always really enjoyed it. Let's say South Africa, because I spent a lot of time on the continent of Africa, and when I was in South Africa for several months, it was also like a kind of a restful time in my life. And then, wow, I got to pick a third country. I'm going to pick Macedonia, this really small country in Eastern Europe. Doesn't get a lot of visitors, but it was just a beautiful kind of special place when I went, and it also had
Oh,
good internet.
oh, okay. Well, that's well, I wouldn't have guessed that, but Australia, South Africa, and Macedonia. Wow, that's
Yep. Mhm.
yeah, that's very interesting. So, um, for yourself, because you've, I guess, traveled the world, you've traveled quite a lot, and you're obviously a blogger and author. Looking back at your life, do you have any regrets or any things that you would have done differently?
Oh, sure, for sure. Probably have a lot of regrets. I don't know that I have a lot of career regrets. I think for the most part, I'm glad that I did what I did. Maybe I wish I'd started sooner, because it was such a great thing. Like I'm so glad like I entered that world. So if there's somebody who's watching or listening, and you're thinking about like, should I start my project? Do I want to blog or vlog or whatever it is you want to do? I would say like, don't wait, because it's going to be very, very good for you. But in terms of like looking back, like on whether this decision should have gone that way or another way, I don't usually do that very much, because you can't change it.
Hmm.
You can only influence like what's in front of you now, and then hopefully build something for a future. But even that's kind of out of your hands.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, no, that's a really great point. So just, I guess, get started sooner the better.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
How long have you been doing this? How long have you been doing?
So
in this interview series?
I actually just recently started. So I started probably back in March. And
Okay.
this kind of idea came up because someone just said, "Oh, why don't you interview the authors because you like to read?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I never really thought about that."
Yeah.
So that's why I'm
Yeah.
here.
That's good. Well, aren't you, yeah. Are you glad you did?
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
I'm actually glad I did.
Good.
I wish I started earlier, like you said, but
Right.
it just
Well,
kind
here
of
you
happened.
are.
Yeah. So no, that's really great advice to, I guess, the audience out there. It's whatever you have in mind, just get started earlier. Yeah. And for yourself, do you are there any sort of projects coming up that you're thinking of doing, or what's in the works for yourself?
Yeah. So last year I did about a 30 city tour for my last book, and I enjoyed it so much that when I finished, I was like, I want to keep going, but you can't just say like at the end of 30 days, okay, give me 30 more. Like it has to be like an organization, take some time. So this time, because this is my year of the side hustle and doing a different podcast story every day for 365 days, I'm going to do a 100 city tour.
Whoa.
So I'm going to meet my readers and listeners all over the U.S., Canada, but then also elsewhere around the world. So I'm starting that on September 19th.
Okay, so no, that's amazing. 100 cities. That's wow. I can't even imagine. And all right, well, as we're nearing the end of this interview, where can the audience connect with you?
Great. Well, thank you, first of all, audience, for listening or watching. And you can connect with me. Website is sidehustleschool.com. The podcast is called Side Hustle School. You can listen in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. And I'm Chris Guillebeau.
Okay. Well, all right. Well, everyone watching, I'll drop a link down below on where you can
Perfect.
connect with Chris. And yeah, thank you so much, Chris, for taking the time to have this interview with me today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah. Well, yeah. No, thank you so much.
Cool.